Behind the golden gates of Aldermere Palace, where secrets flow like wine at royal banquets, a single document would shatter a kingdom's trust forever. What began as a routine security check would expose a betrayal so profound that even the most loyal guards would be forced to choose between duty and conscience. When Queen Consort Isabel's trembling hands were caught red-handed in Princess Elena's private chambers, holding files that could destroy reputations and topple alliances, the very foundation of the Aldermere dynasty began to crack. This is the story of how one woman's desperate curiosity unleashed a storm that would test the limits of royal loyalty and force a prince to make the most difficult decision of his reign. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Aldermere Palace like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip on the fortress that had stood for 8 centuries. Inside the towering walls, the daily rhythm of royal life was beginning its familiar dance. Servants moved through marble corridors with practiced silence, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old Persian rugs that had witnessed the rise and fall of kings. Prince Alexander stood at the window of his private study, watching the grounds crew tend to the rose gardens that his late mother had loved so dearly. The morning light caught the silver threads that had begun appearing in his dark hair, a reminder that at 38 he was no longer the carefree prince who had once scandalized the kingdom with his adventures. Marriage to Princess Elena had changed him, grounding him in ways he never thought possible. "Your Highness," came a gentle knock at the door. Thomas Hartwell, his private secretary, entered with the day's schedule clutched in his weathered hands. Thomas had served the royal family for 23 years, his loyalty as unshakable as the palace foundations. "The meeting with the education minister is at 10, followed by lunch with the Commonwealth ambassadors," Thomas recited, his voice carrying the weight of routine. "Princess Elena mentioned she would be reviewing the Charity Foundation proposals in her office this morning." Alexander nodded, his mind already shifting to the day's responsibilities. Elena had thrown herself into charitable work, with a passion that both inspired and concerned him. She worked tirelessly, often pushing herself beyond reasonable limits, driven by a desire to make a meaningful difference in their kingdom. 3 floors below, in the west wing where morning light filtered through stained glass windows, Princess Elena sat surrounded by towers of documents. Her private office was a sanctuary of organized chaos, where reports on children's hospitals mixed with proposals for environmental conservation programs. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed funding requests with meticulous attention to detail. Elena had always been methodical, a trait that had served her well in her previous life as a university professor before her marriage to Alexander transformed her into royalty. She approached her charitable duties with the same academic rigor she had once applied to her research, believing that every pound spent should create maximum impact for those in need. "Ma'am?"
Sarah Chen, her personal assistant, appeared in the doorway with a tea service.
"I thought you might need some refreshment. You've been at this since dawn." Elena accepted the tea gratefully, allowing herself a moment to gaze out at the gardens. "There's so much need, Sarah. Sometimes I feel like we're trying to empty the ocean with a teacup." "Your work makes a difference," Sarah replied with genuine warmth. "The children's literacy program alone has helped thousands." What Elena didn't know was that her dedication had not gone unnoticed by others in the palace. Queen Consort Isabel, Alexander's stepmother, had been watching Elena's growing influence with increasing unease. Isabel had married Alexander's father, King Edward, 5 years after the death of his beloved first wife, and had spent the subsequent decade trying to establish her own legacy within the royal family. Isabel was a woman of striking beauty and sharp intelligence, qualities that had initially attracted the grieving king. However, her ambitions extended far beyond the ceremonial role traditionally assigned to royal consorts. She had her own vision for the monarchy's future, and Elena's popularity with both the public and the press had begun to overshadow her own carefully cultivated image. The queen consort's apartments occupied the entire south wing of the palace, decorated in shades of cream and gold that reflected her refined taste. That morning, as Elena worked diligently on her charitable endeavors, Isabel paced her sitting room with growing agitation. "She's becoming too prominent," Isabel muttered to her lady-in-waiting Victoria Ashworth, who had served as both confidant and enabler for years. "Every newspaper, every magazine feature focuses on Elena's work. What about my initiatives? What about my contributions to this family?" Victoria, a thin woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, nodded sympathetically. "Perhaps if we knew more about her methods, her connections, understanding how she operates might help you better position your own projects." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Isabel had always prided herself on being above petty jealousy, but Elena's success gnawed at her in ways she was reluctant to admit. The younger woman's natural grace, her effortless connection with people, and her genuine passion for helping others had won hearts that Isabel had spent years trying to capture. Meanwhile, in the security office located in the palace's converted dungeon, Chief of Security Marcus Reed was conducting his weekly review of palace protocols. A former military officer with 30 years of service, Marcus took his responsibility for the royal family's safety with deadly seriousness. Every door, every corridor, every potential vulnerability was catalogued and monitored. "Sir," Sergeant James Fletcher approached his desk with a concerned expression. "There's been some unusual activity in the surveillance logs. Someone accessed the West Wing after hours last night." Marcus looked up sharply. The West Wing, which housed Elena's office among other administrative spaces, was supposed to be secured after 6 p.m. unless special arrangements were made. "Who was it?" "That's just it, sir. The access card used was registered, but the person didn't follow standard check-in procedures. They avoided the main security checkpoint." The chief of security felt a familiar tightening in his chest that had served him well during his military career. Something wasn't right. In his experience, people only avoided security protocols when they had something to hide. "Pull the footage," he ordered. "I want to know exactly who was in that wing and what they were doing there." As Fletcher hurried to comply, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking at the beginning of something much larger than a simple security breach. The palace operated on trust and tradition, but those same qualities that made it a home could also make it vulnerable to those who would exploit them. Back in Elena's office, the princess was deep in concentration, reviewing the proposal for a new mental health initiative for teenagers, when she noticed something odd. Several files that she had left in a specific order on her desk were now arranged differently. It was subtle, the kind of thing that might escape notice unless someone was as organized as Elena. She paused, studying the documents more carefully. Her personal filing system was something of a legend among the palace staff. She could find any document within seconds and knew exactly where everything belonged. These papers had definitely been moved. "Sarah," she called to her assistant, who was working at a smaller desk near the window. "Did anyone else come into my office yesterday after you left?" Sarah looked up, her brow furrowing in thought. "No, ma'am." "I locked the door myself at 6:30, just as always. Is something wrong?" Elena hesitated, not wanting to seem paranoid. "It's probably nothing. Just some papers that seem to have been moved." But it wasn't nothing, and deep down, Elena knew it. Someone had been in her private office, going through her confidential files. The realization sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the palace's ancient heating system. In the security office, Marcus was staring at a frozen frame from the surveillance footage with growing disbelief. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m., and the figure, moving stealthily down the West Wing corridor, was clearly visible despite the dim lighting. The person was dressed in dark clothing and moved with purpose, someone familiar with the palace layout. "Enhance Sector 7, he instructed Fletcher, his voice tight with tension. As the image sharpened, Marcus felt his blood run cold. The face captured by the camera belonged to Queen Consort Isabel. She was carrying what appeared to be a small bag and a flashlight, and her expression was one of intense concentration.
"My God," Fletcher whispered.
"Sir, what do we do with this?" Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind racing through the implications. A member of the royal family caught on camera conducting unauthorized nighttime activities in a restricted area. The potential for scandal was enormous, but more importantly, what had the Queen Consort been looking for in Elena's office? "We investigate quietly," he decided, "and we tell no one about this until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." The morning passed in a blur of routine activities that masked the growing tension within the palace walls. Alexander attended his meetings, Elena continued her charitable work, and Isabel maintained her schedule of social engagements. But beneath the surface, forces were aligning that would soon shatter the carefully maintained harmony of royal life. It was just after lunch when Elena made the discovery that would change everything. While searching for a specific funding report, she opened her locked filing cabinet with her personal key and immediately noticed that the lock mechanism appeared to have been tampered with. Tiny scratches around the keyhole suggested that someone had tried to pick or force the lock. Her heart pounding, Elena began checking the contents of the cabinet systematically. Most of her files appeared untouched, but when she reached the section containing her personal correspondence and private notes about various royal family members, she found clear evidence of intrusion. Several letters from Alexander discussing his concerns about palace politics were out of order. More disturbing, a private report she had commissioned about improving security protocols for royal children was missing entirely. The report contained detailed information about current security weaknesses and recommendations for improvement, exactly the kind of information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Elena's mind raced as she considered the implications. Someone had specifically targeted her most sensitive files, suggesting this wasn't random theft but a calculated intelligence-gathering operation. The question was, who would go to such lengths, and what did they plan to do with the information? Her first instinct was to call Alexander immediately, but she hesitated. Without concrete proof of who was responsible, accusations could tear the family apart. Instead, she decided to document everything carefully and then approach Marcus Reed through official channels. What Elena didn't realize was that her discovery had come too late. Miles away from the palace, in a discreet London office building, a man named Simon Cross was already reviewing copies of her stolen files. Cross was what polite society called a reputation management consultant, though his methods were far from polite. He specialized in acquiring and leveraging sensitive information about public figures, operating in the gray area between legal investigation and outright blackmail. Interesting reading, he murmured to his assistant as he flipped through photocopied pages of Elena's handwritten notes about various royal family dynamics. Her Highness is quite perceptive about palace politics. These observations about family tensions could be very valuable to certain media outlets. The assistant, a young woman named Rachel who had been drawn into Cross's web through financial desperation, felt sick as she watched him work. Are we really going to use this against the royal family? Cross looked up with cold eyes. My dear Rachel, information is power. And power is currency. The princess has documented some very unflattering truths about her in-laws. The question is whether we sell this to the highest bidder or use it to secure more long-term advantages. Back at the palace, as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the ancient stones, Elena finally made her decision. She picked up her secure phone line and dialed Marcus Reed's direct number. Chief Reed, this is Princess Elena. I need to see you immediately. We have a serious security breach. Marcus, who had spent the day wrestling with his own shocking discovery, felt pieces of a very dangerous puzzle beginning to fall into place. I'll be right there, Your Highness. And, ma'am, I believe you're right to be concerned. As evening approached Aldermere Palace, neither Elena nor Marcus could have imagined how much worse things were about to become.
The stolen files were already in motion, copies were being made, and Queen Consort Isabel was preparing for a confrontation that would force Prince Alexander to make a choice that would define not only his marriage, but the future of the monarchy itself. The ancient palace had weathered many storms over its 8th-century history, but the tempest brewing within its walls would test the strength of its foundations like never before.
Trust, the invisible mortar that held the royal family together, was beginning to crumble, and once it fell, even the most skilled craftsmen would struggle to rebuild what had been destroyed. In her private chambers, Isabel stood before her mirror, applying the last touches of makeup before dinner. She had no idea that her midnight excursion had been captured on camera, or that the consequences of her actions were already spiraling beyond her control. All she knew was that she had finally taken action to level the playing field in her competition with Elena for influence and respect within the royal hierarchy. The game had begun, and there would be no winners. The emergency meeting between Princess Elena and Chief of Security Marcus Reed took place in the secure conference room adjacent to the palace's main security center. The windowless chamber was swept daily for listening devices and maintained the highest level of confidentiality protocols. As Elena entered, she noticed the tension etched across Marcus's weathered features, suggesting he had disturbing news of his own to share. Your Highness, Marcus began, his military bearing evident in his rigid posture, before we discuss your security concerns, I must share something that will likely shock you. We've discovered unauthorized access to your office through surveillance footage. Elena felt her stomach drop, though part of her had expected this confirmation. When did this occur? 2 nights ago, at approximately 2:47 a.m. The individual used what appears to be a master key or picked lock to enter your private workspace. Marcus paused, clearly struggling with the next revelation. Your Highness, the person captured on our security cameras is Queen Consort Isabel. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had suspected palace intrigue, perhaps a rogue staff member or external threat, but never imagined that Alexander's stepmother would violate her privacy so brazenly. Are you absolutely certain? Elena asked, though she knew Marcus would never make such an accusation without ironclad evidence. I've reviewed the footage multiple times with my senior staff. The identification is definitive. Marcus activated a secure tablet and showed Elena the enhanced surveillance images. The face was unmistakably Isabel's, caught in the pale glow of emergency lighting as she moved through the corridor with practiced stealth. Elena studied the images with growing disbelief. Isabel appeared calm and methodical in the footage, suggesting this wasn't an impulsive act but a carefully planned operation. What was she carrying? A small bag, possibly containing tools for lock-picking or photocopying equipment. We also observed her using what appeared to be a professional-grade flashlight designed for covert operations. Marcus's tone remained professional, but Elena could detect his own shock at these revelations. My filing cabinet was definitely tampered with, Elena confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil building inside her. Several sensitive files have been accessed, and at least one important security report is missing entirely. Marcus made detailed notes as Elena described her discoveries. The missing security report particularly concerned him, as it contained vulnerability assessments that could compromise the safety of the entire royal family if misused.
Your Highness, I must recommend that we inform Prince Alexander immediately.
This situation has implications beyond personal privacy concerns. If the Queen Consort has been compromised or is acting on behalf of external interests, we could be facing a national security threat.
Elena nodded grimly. The conversation she had been dreading was now unavoidable.
Confronting Alexander about his stepmother's betrayal would force him to choose between family loyalty and justice, a position no husband should face. Schedule a private meeting with His Highness for this evening, Elena decided. We'll present the evidence together and let him decide how to proceed. But Marcus, until then, this information stays between us.
If word of this leaks prematurely, it could destroy the monarchy's reputation irreparably. While Elena and Marcus planned their approach, Queen Consort Isabel was maintaining her usual afternoon schedule, attending a charity luncheon for the Royal Botanical Society with no indication that her secret activities had been discovered.
She moved through the event with practiced grace, accepting compliments on her elegant blue silk dress and engaging in the type of sophisticated small talk that had made her a favorite among London's social elite.
Your Majesty, gushed Mrs. Europe.
Penelope Worthington, the Society's president, your support for our orchid conservation project has been absolutely transformative. The media coverage has brought unprecedented attention to our cause.
Isabel smiled warmly, though inwardly she bristled at the inevitable comparison that would follow.
Thank you, Mrs. Worthington. Conservation work is so important, though I know Princess Elena's environmental initiatives have certainly raised the profile of such causes. The comment was delivered with apparent magnanimity, but those who knew Isabel well would have detected the subtle edge in her voice. Victoria Ashworth, standing nearby with the other ladies-in-waiting, certainly noticed and filed the observation away for later consideration. As the luncheon concluded, Isabel felt a vibration from her secure mobile phone, indicating a message from Simon Cross. The communication was brief but alarming. Package delivered successfully. Media interest substantial. Recommend immediate strategic consultation. Isabel's carefully maintained composure faltered for just a moment.
She had expected Cross to take more time evaluating the stolen documents before making any moves. If he was already fielding media inquiries, events were moving much faster than she had anticipated.
Victoria, she murmured to her lady-in-waiting. I'm afraid I need to return to the palace immediately. Please make my apologies to the Botanical Society. The drive back to Aldermere Palace took 45 minutes through London traffic, giving Isabel time to consider her options.
She had convinced herself that accessing Elena's files was justified research, a way to better understand her stepdaughter-in-law's methods and connections. The involvement of someone like Simon Cross had seemed like a reasonable next step, a way to level the playing field in palace politics. Now, facing the reality that her actions might have triggered a media-feeding frenzy, Isabel was beginning to question the wisdom of her choices. Royal scandals had a way of consuming everyone in their path, regardless of their original intentions or justifications.
Meanwhile, in his private study, Prince Alexander was reviewing briefing documents for an upcoming state visit when Thomas Hartwell entered with an unusual request. Your Highness, Princess Elena has asked for an urgent private meeting this evening. She mentioned it concerns a significant security matter. Alexander looked up with immediate concern. Elena rarely used such formal language unless the situation was genuinely serious.
Did she provide any additional details? No, sir, but Chief Reed will be joining the meeting, which suggests official security protocols are involved. The prince felt a familiar knot form in his stomach.
His position required him to deal with various threats and challenges, but anything involving Elena's safety triggered his deepest protective instincts. Clear my evening schedule after 7 o'clock.
We'll meet in the Blue Room for complete privacy. As afternoon transitioned to evening, the various players in this unfolding drama prepared for confrontations that would reshape their relationships forever. Elena spent the remaining hours documenting every detail of her discoveries,
creating a comprehensive record that could withstand scrutiny. Marcus Reed coordinated with his security team to ensure the palace remained secure, while potentially explosive family tensions played out.
Queen Consort Isabel, unaware that her secret had been exposed, continued her normal evening routine. She changed into a burgundy evening dress for dinner, applied her jewelry with customary care, and prepared to face her family with the same mask of gracious warmth she had worn for years. The dinner itself was a study in controlled tension. Alexander, Elena, and Isabel gathered in the smaller family dining room, attended by only the most trusted staff members. The conversation covered safe topics, upcoming charitable events, the progress of the palace renovation project, and plans for the approaching Christmas season. Elena found herself studying Isabel with new eyes, searching for signs of guilt or deception in the older woman's demeanor. Isabel appeared completely at ease, complimenting Elena on her recent speech to the Children's Hospital Foundation and inquiring about Alexander's upcoming diplomatic trip to Scotland. "You both work so tirelessly," Isabel observed, her tone carrying what seemed like genuine admiration. "I sometimes worry that you don't take enough time for yourselves. This life can be quite demanding." Alexander, who had noticed Elena's unusual quietness during the meal, felt increasingly concerned about the upcoming meeting. His wife's ability to maintain pleasant conversation while clearly troubled by something serious demonstrated the strength that had drawn him to her, but it also indicated the gravity of whatever situation they were facing. At precisely 8 o'clock, the three family members gathered in the Blue Room, where Marcus Reed was waiting with a sealed folder containing the surveillance footage and Elena's documented evidence. The room's intimate setting, with its comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace, seemed incongruous for such a serious discussion.
"Alexander," Elena began, her voice steady but strained, "what we need to discuss tonight will be difficult for all of us. Before we begin, I want you to know that I've approached this situation with the utmost care for our family's well-being and the monarchy's reputation."
Alexander's expression grew grave as he took his seat. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Marcus stepped forward with the folder. "Your Highness, 2 nights ago, our security cameras captured unauthorized access to Princess Elena's private office. The individual responsible used sophisticated methods to bypass our standard protocols." As Marcus presented the surveillance footage on a secure tablet, Alexander's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror as he recognized the figure on the screen. Isabel. His voice was barely a whisper as he looked from the footage to his stepmother, who had gone completely pale. "What were you doing in Elena's office at 3 in the morning?" Isabel's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. The weight of discovery, combined with the accusatory stares of her family members, overwhelmed her ability to maintain her facade of innocence.
"I can't explain," she began, her voice trembling. "It wasn't what you think.
I wasn't trying to harm anyone or cause trouble for the family." "Then what exactly were you trying to do?" Elena asked, her tone carefully controlled, but clearly demanding answers. Isabel looked around the room like a trapped animal, her eyes darting between Alexander's shocked face, Elena's cold stare, and Marcus's professional disapproval. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "I needed to understand," she finally admitted. "Elena's work, her connections, her methods. She's been so successful, so popular with the media and the public. I thought if I could learn from her approach, I could improve my own initiatives." "So you decided to break into her private office and steal confidential documents?" Alexander's voice carried a dangerous edge that Elena had rarely heard. "Isabel, these aren't business competitors we're talking about.
This is family. I didn't steal anything," Isabel protested, though her protest lacked conviction. "I was just trying to research, to understand better." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically.
"Your Majesty, our investigation indicates that several sensitive documents are missing from Princess Elena's files, including a security assessment report that contains classified information about palace vulnerabilities." Alexander stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists as he struggled to process this betrayal by someone he had trusted implicitly. Isabel had been more than just his father's wife. She had been a stabilizing presence during his own turbulent youth, offering guidance and support when he needed it most. "Where are the documents now?" he demanded. Isabel's silence stretched far too long, confirming everyone's worst fears. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I gave them to someone who could help me understand their significance, a consultant who specializes in strategic communication and reputation management." "You gave classified royal family documents to an outside consultant?" Alexander's voice rose despite his efforts to maintain control. Do you have any idea what you've done? Bobby SSF.
The security implications alone could compromise the safety of everyone in this family. Elena placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm, recognizing that his anger, while justified, was escalating beyond productive levels. Isabel, we need the name of this consultant immediately, along with any copies of documents that were made.
His name is Simon Cross, Isabel admitted, her dignity crumbling with each revelation. He has offices in London.
I thought he could provide insights that would help me be more effective in my royal duties. Marcus was already making notes, preparing to initiate damage control procedures that would involve both palace security and potentially external law enforcement agencies.
The name Simon Cross was unfortunately familiar to him from previous security briefings about individuals who posed potential threats to the royal family's reputation. Simon Cross is known to our security services, Marcus informed the group grimly. He operates in the gray area between legitimate public relations and information brokerage. If he has sensitive royal documents, we must assume they will be leaked or sold to media outlets within days, if not hours.
Alexander sank back into his chair, the full magnitude of the crisis finally hitting him. This wasn't just a family dispute, or a momentary lapse in judgment. Isabel's actions had potentially exposed the entire royal family to public scandal, security vulnerabilities, and constitutional crisis.
How could you be so reckless? He asked his stepmother, his voice now carrying more hurt than anger. After everything this family has done for you, everything we've shared, how could you risk destroying it all? Isabel began to cry, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her actions and their consequences became clear. I never meant for it to go this far. I was just so frustrated, feeling like I was always in Elena's shadow. Every newspaper article, every magazine feature focused on her work. I've given 10 years of my life to this family, and sometimes I feel invisible. Elena felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the older woman, recognizing the deep insecurities that had driven such destructive behavior.
Palace life could be isolating and competitive, particularly for someone trying to establish their own identity within an established hierarchy.
This, Isabel, Elena said gently. If you had concerns about your role or wanted to collaborate on projects, why didn't you come to us directly? We could have worked together instead of this ending up as some kind of competition.
Because I was afraid, Isabel admitted through her tears. Afraid that you would see me as weak or jealous.
Afraid that Alexander would lose respect for me. I thought if I could just understand your methods better, I could prove my own worth without having to ask for help. The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. Alexander felt torn between his anger at the betrayal and his sympathy for the woman who had helped raise him. Elena struggled with her own mixed emotions, understanding Isabel's insecurities while remaining furious about the violation of her privacy. Marcus, ever practical, broke the silence.
Your Majesties, we need to focus on damage control. If Simon Cross has already distributed copies of these documents to media outlets, we need to prepare for potential publication.
We should also consider legal options for recovering the stolen materials. Alexander nodded grimly.
What are our options? We can pursue criminal charges for theft and breach of security, but that would require public disclosure of the break-in and could generate exactly the kind of media attention we're trying to avoid. Alternatively, we could attempt to recover the documents through civil litigation or negotiation, but there's no guarantee of success.
Elena had been thinking during this exchange, and now she spoke with the decisive tone that had made her such an effective charitable administrator. Before we decide on legal action, I think we need to know exactly what Simon Cross plans to do with these documents. Has he already sold them to newspapers? Is he planning to publish them himself? Our response needs to match the actual threat level. I can contact him, Isabel offered desperately. I can try to get the documents back, explain that there was a misunderstanding. Absolutely not, Alexander said firmly. You've done enough damage. Any further contact with this man needs to go through official channels with legal representation present. As the meeting continued past 10 o'clock, the weight of decision-making pressed down on everyone present.
The stolen documents contain not just Elena's charitable work and personal observations, but also private correspondence between Elena and Alexander discussing various family members' security concerns and even intimate details about their marriage and hopes for children. If published, these revelations would not only embarrass the royal family, but could also damage relationships with other European monarchies, affect diplomatic negotiations, and undermine public confidence in the institution itself. The personal cost would be equally devastating, with private conversations and thoughts exposed to public scrutiny and mockery. There's something else we need to consider, Marcus said reluctantly. If the Queen Consort's actions become public knowledge, either through media exposure or legal proceedings, we'll face questions about palace security that could have broader implications.
How did she obtain access? Are there other vulnerabilities? Can the royal family be trusted with sensitive information? Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of leadership in ways he never had before. Every decision carried consequences that rippled far beyond his personal preferences or family loyalties. The monarchy was bigger than any individual, yet it was built on the actions and choices of the people who comprised it. I need time to think, he finally said. Isabel, you will remain in the palace until we resolve this situation. No outside contact, no public appearances, and absolutely no communication with Simon Cross or anyone associated with him. Is that understood? Isabel nodded miserably, understanding that she was essentially under house arrest within her own home. The consequences of her actions were expanding beyond anything she had imagined when she first decided to access Elena's files. Elena stood as well, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation. Marcus, I want a complete security review of all palace access points and protocols. If one person could breach our privacy this easily, we need to know what other vulnerabilities exist. As the meeting concluded, each participant faced a sleepless night ahead. Alexander would spend the hours wrestling with questions of justice, mercy, and political necessity. Elena would wonder if her marriage could survive the fractures this betrayal had created within their family. Marcus would coordinate with law enforcement and legal advisors to explore their limited options. And Isabel would sit in her elegant chambers surrounded by the luxury and privilege she had risked everything to protect, finally understanding that her desperate attempt to secure her position had instead threatened to destroy everything she had worked to build over the past decade. Outside the palace walls, Simon Cross was already fielding calls from tabloid editors eager to pay substantial sums for exclusive access to the royal family's private documents. The storm that had been brewing within the ancient walls was about to burst into public view, and there would be no shelter from the destruction it would bring. The night stretched ahead of them all, dark with uncertainty and heavy with the knowledge that by dawn, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Marcus Reed's secure phone rang with the urgency that every security professional dreads. The caller was Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell from Scotland Yard's Specialist Protection Unit, her voice tight with professional concern. Chief Reed, we have a situation. Simon Cross has been found dead in his London office. Early indicators suggest suicide, but given his recent activities involving your principals, we need to coordinate our response immediately. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he processed this unexpected development. When did this happen? His body was discovered by his assistant around 6 this morning. She found a note indicating he was facing financial ruin and legal troubles related to his business practices. He apparently destroyed several client files before taking his own life, but we don't yet know if the royal documents were among them. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Cross had destroyed the stolen documents before his death, it might solve their immediate crisis but would leave them unable to determine how widely the information had been distributed. Alternatively, if the documents survived and were now in police custody, they faced potential public disclosure through legal proceedings. I need to inform their Royal Highnesses immediately, Marcus said. Can you secure the scene until we determine our next steps? Already done. We have the office sealed and are treating this as a potential national security matter given the reported theft of classified royal documents. But, Chief Reed, there's something else you need to know. Cross's assistant, a young woman named Rachel Turner, is asking for protection. She claims to have information about threats made against the royal family. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the situation spiral further out of control. We'll be there within the hour. The drive from Aldermere Palace to Simon Cross's London office building took place in tense silence. Alexander, Elena, and Marcus traveled in an unmarked security vehicle, each lost in their own thoughts about how this unexpected development would affect their crisis. The death of their primary antagonist should have felt like relief, but instead it added new layers of uncertainty and complexity. Do we know anything about this assistant? Elena asked as they navigated through early morning traffic. Rachel Turner, 26 years old, recently graduated from university with substantial student debt. Marcus read from his tablet. According to preliminary interviews, she was hired by Cross 6 months ago and has been increasingly uncomfortable with his business methods. Detective Inspector Mitchell believes she may have crucial information about what Cross did with your documents. Alexander stared out the window at the bustling London streets. People going about their normal lives unaware of the crisis threatening to engulf the monarchy. If she has information about threats against us, we need to take that seriously regardless of how we handle the document situation. The office building where Simon Cross had operated his reputation management consultancy was a nondescript commercial structure in Canary Wharf, chosen specifically for its anonymity among the forest of similar glass towers. Police had cordoned off the entire 15th floor and plainclothes officers maintained discreet positions throughout the building. Detective Inspector Mitchell met them at the elevator. A competent-looking woman in her early 40s whose calm demeanor suggested extensive experience with sensitive investigations. Your Highness's Chief Reed, thank you for responding so quickly. The situation is complex, but I believe we can resolve it in a way that protects both your interests and the integrity of our investigation. Cross's office was a sterile environment that revealed little about the man who had threatened their family. Modern furniture, expensive technology, and several filing cabinets suggested a successful business, but there were no personal photographs or decorations that might indicate human connections beyond professional ones.
We found this on his desk, Detective Inspector Mitchell said, handing Alexander a handwritten note in a plastic evidence bag. The message was brief but devastating. I cannot live with the consequences of my actions.
The royal family deserves better than what I have become. R.T. C.U.R.O.S. As the details. Elena read the note over Alexander's shoulder, feeling a complex mix of emotions.
Cross's death was tragic regardless of his actions against their family, but his reference to Rachel Turner suggested their crisis was far from over.
R.T. is Rachel Turner, his assistant, Mitchell explained. She's been extremely cooperative, but she's also terrified. According to her statement, Cross received several threatening phone calls in recent days from individuals demanding access to the royal documents. When he refused to share them, the threats escalated to include violence against both him and his staff. Marcus leaned forward intently. Are we dealing with foreign intelligence services, criminal organizations, or domestic threats? Unknown at this point, but Turner has provided recordings of several conversations that suggest organized crime involvement. Apparently, Cross's business model involved more than just reputation management. He was also facilitating information sales to various unsavory characters, and some of his previous clients were not pleased with his discretion. Alexander felt the situation growing more complicated by the minute. What had begun as a family betrayal was now potentially connected to organized crime and threats against national security.
Where is Rachel Turner now? Safe house in central London. She's requesting a meeting with you directly, claiming she has information that could prevent further attacks on the royal family.
Elena and Alexander exchanged glances, both recognizing the difficult position they were in. Meeting with Turner could provide crucial information, but it would also acknowledge their involvement in the document theft and potentially expose them to additional security risks.
What exactly does she know? Elena asked. Detective Inspector Mitchell consulted her notes carefully.
According to her preliminary statement, Cross was planning to sell the royal documents to the highest bidder rather than releasing them to media outlets. She believes he may have already negotiated with several potential buyers, including foreign intelligence services and at least one criminal organization with interests in British politics. The revelation hit the royal couple like a physical blow. Their private thoughts, family discussions, and security information weren't just at risk of public embarrassment through tabloid publication, but could potentially be used for blackmail, foreign interference, or even direct threats against their safety.
We need to speak with her, Alexander decided. If there are active threats against our family, we need to understand the scope and nature of the danger.
The safe house was located in a converted townhouse in Bloomsbury, chosen for its discreet location and multiple escape routes. Rachel Turner proved to be a slight young woman with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who had been forced to mature quickly under pressure. She was flanked by protection officers, but appeared more determined than frightened as she prepared to share her information.
Your Highnesses, she began with a slight tremor in her voice, I want you to know that I never intended to participate in anything that would harm your family. When I took the job with Mr. Cross, I thought he was a legitimate public relations consultant.
Elena leaned forward sympathetically. We understand you were in a difficult position.
What can you tell us about the threats he received? Rachel produced a small digital recorder from her purse. I started recording his phone conversations 3 days ago when I realized how dangerous the situation was becoming. The callers weren't interested in money. They wanted the documents for purposes that sounded much more sinister than simple scandal mongering. As she played back excerpts from the recordings, the royal couple heard accented voices making specific threats against Cross and demanding immediate access to the princess files. The conversations were chilling in their casual references to violence and their detailed knowledge of both Cross's business operations and the royal family's daily routines.
Did Cross give them copies of the documents? Marcus asked grimly.
Not while I was there, but he was under enormous pressure. Yesterday afternoon he made several trips to his private vault, and I believe he may have removed materials to use as collateral in negotiations with these people. Alexander felt his protective instincts surge as he considered the implications. Unknown criminal elements had access to his family's private information and were apparently willing to use violence to obtain more. The situation had evolved far beyond a simple privacy breach into a direct security threat. "Rachel," Elena said gently, "do you know who these people are or what organization they represent?" The young woman hesitated before answering. "From their conversations, I believe they're connected to a money laundering operation that uses high-profile scandals to manipulate financial markets. They mentioned something about royal insurance policies and timing their revelations to coincide with major economic events." Detective Inspector Mitchell took detailed notes as Rachel continued her account. The picture emerging was of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that used insider information about public figures to influence everything from stock prices to political negotiations. The royal family's private documents would be extremely valuable to such an organization, not just for their scandal potential, but for their insight into government decision-making processes. "There's something else," Rachel continued. "Mr. Cross was scheduled to meet with these people today at 2 o'clock. What is it?" "He was supposed to bring all the royal documents to a warehouse in East London. When he doesn't show up, they're going to be very angry." Marcus immediately began coordinating with Detective Inspector Mitchell on surveillance and security measures for the warehouse location. If the criminal organization was expecting to collect the documents today, law enforcement might have an opportunity to identify and apprehend them. "What happened to the documents after Cross's death?" Alexander asked. "I think he destroyed most of them last night before he killed himself," Rachel replied. "I heard paper shredding and saw him burning materials in his office fireplace. But he kept talking about insurance policies and backup copies, so I can't be certain everything was destroyed." Elena felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. If Cross had destroyed the documents, their immediate crisis might be resolved, but the existence of backup copies meant the threat could resurface at any time.
More importantly, the criminal organization's interest in their family suggested ongoing security risks beyond the document theft. "Your Highnesses," Detective Inspector Mitchell interrupted, "we need to make some immediate decisions about your security arrangements.
If these individuals are as dangerous as they appear, we should consider relocating you to a more secure facility until we can assess the full scope of the threat." Alexander bristled at the suggestion. "We can't hide every time someone threatens the royal family. It would set a precedent that could undermine the entire institution. With respect, sir, this isn't just about institutional dignity. These people have demonstrated detailed knowledge of your daily routines and have made specific threats about timing their actions to coincide with your public appearances." Elena placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm, recognizing the tension between his instinct to maintain normal operations and the legitimate security concerns being raised by professionals. "What if we modify our schedule while maintaining our public commitments? We could change routes, timing, and locations while still fulfilling our duties." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That would allow us to maintain operational security while avoiding the appearance of capitulation to threats. We could also use the modifications to create opportunities for law enforcement to identify and apprehend the individuals involved." As they developed security protocols, Rachel Turner raised another concerning issue. "There's something else you should know about the warehouse meeting. The people who were calling Mr. Cross mentioned that they have someone inside the palace providing them with information about your movements and security arrangements."
The revelation sent a chill through everyone present. If the criminal organization had infiltrated palace security or staff, their safety was compromised regardless of what protective measures were implemented. More troubling, it suggested that Queen Consort Isabel's actions might have been part of a larger conspiracy rather than the impulsive jealousy they had assumed.
"Do you have any information about who this inside source might be?" Marcus demanded. Rachel shook her head regretfully. They were very careful not to mention names or specific details, but they seemed confident about their access to real-time information about your family's activities. Alexander felt the weight of betrayal settling over him like a heavy cloak. First Isabel's theft of Elena's documents, and now the possibility that someone else within their trusted circle was actively collaborating with criminal elements. The very people they depended on for security and support had become potential sources of danger. "We need to implement full counterintelligence protocols," Marcus decided. "Background checks on all staff, surveillance of communications, and compartmentalization of sensitive information until we identify the source of the leak." Elena watched her husband's face as he processed these developments, seeing the strain of leadership in the tight lines around his eyes and the rigid set of his shoulders. The personal betrayals were difficult enough, but the threat to their subjects and the institution they served added layers of responsibility that few people could understand.
Detective Inspector,
She said finally,
What are our options for dealing with this criminal organization directly? We have several approaches available.
We can set up surveillance of the warehouse location and attempt to apprehend the individuals when they arrive for their scheduled meeting. Alternatively, we could use the inside information provided by Ms. Turner to develop a longer-term investigation that might expose the entire network. What about the immediate threat to our family? Alexander asked. Enhanced security protocols, modified schedules, and possibly using yourselves as bait to draw them out under controlled circumstances where we can ensure your safety while gathering intelligence. The suggestion of using themselves as bait alarmed Elena, but she recognized the logic. If they could identify and neutralize this threat decisively, it would be better than living under constant uncertainty about when and how the next attack might come. We need to consider the broader implications, she said thoughtfully. If we handle this wrong, it could set precedents that encourage other criminal organizations to target the royal family. But if we handle it correctly, it might serve as a deterrent to future threats. As the afternoon wore on, plans began to take shape for a coordinated response that would address both the immediate security threats and the longer-term institutional concerns. Law enforcement would establish surveillance at the warehouse location while Palace security implemented enhanced protection protocols. Rachel Turner would continue providing information about Cross's business operations while being relocated to more secure accommodations. Meanwhile, back at Aldermere Palace, Queen Consort Isabel remained under virtual house arrest, unaware of the deadly consequences her actions had triggered. Her sense of guilt and shame at the family confrontation was about to be overshadowed by the realization that her jealousy had set in motion events that now threatened the very lives of the people she claimed to love. Victoria Ashworth, Isabel's lady-in-waiting, had been monitoring news reports throughout the day and was growing increasingly concerned about her mistress's unusual isolation from normal palace activities. When she knocked on Isabel's chambers that evening, she found the Queen Consort sitting by her window, staring out at the gardens with haunted eyes. "Your Majesty, is everything all right? You've missed several scheduled appointments today." Isabel turned to face her longtime companion, and Victoria was shocked by the change in her appearance. The confident, elegant woman who had dominated palace social circles for a decade now looked fragile and defeated. "Victoria, I've done something terrible. Something that may have put Alexander and Elena in danger." As Isabel began to confess the full scope of her actions to her lady-in-waiting, she had no idea that her words were being recorded by surveillance equipment installed earlier that day as part of Marcus Reed's counterintelligence investigation. Every conversation, every phone call, and every movement within the palace was now being monitored as they searched for the security leak that was providing information to the criminal organization. The storm that had begun with jealousy and stolen documents was now raging beyond anyone's ability to control, threatening not just the reputation of the royal family but their very lives. In the coming hours, decisions would be made that would determine whether the monarchy would emerge stronger from this crisis or be forever damaged by the betrayals and violence that had been unleashed by one woman's desperate attempt to secure her place in history. The ancient walls of Aldermere Palace had weathered many storms over the centuries, but none quite like this. As night fell over the kingdom, the very foundations of trust and security that held the monarchy together were being tested in ways that would determine the fate of everyone within those protective walls. The warehouse in East London stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by unmarked police vehicles and surveillance equipment that transformed the industrial district into a carefully orchestrated trap. Detective Inspector Mitchell coordinated operations from a mobile command center parked 3 blocks away, while Marcus Reed maintained direct communication with Alexander and Elena at their secure location in central London. "Thermal imaging shows at least 6 individuals have entered the warehouse within the past hour," Mitchell reported through her encrypted radio. "They appear to be armed and are positioned near the entrance, suggesting they're expecting Cross to arrive for the scheduled meeting." Alexander watched the surveillance monitors with grim fascination, seeing in real time the faces of people who had threatened his family's safety. The criminal organization's representatives looked professional and disciplined, clearly experienced in violent confrontations. The sight reinforced his decision to allow law enforcement to handle the situation rather than attempting any direct intervention. "Have they tried to contact Cross when he failed to appear?" Elena asked. "Several attempts over the past 2 hours. They seem to be growing increasingly agitated, which could work in our favor if it leads them to make mistakes." Rachel Turner, monitoring communications equipment from the command center, had been providing crucial insights into the criminal organization's methods and expectations. Her intimate knowledge of Cross's business operations made her invaluable for predicting their likely responses to his absence. "They're starting to suspect something went wrong," she reported. "The leader just told his men to prepare for extraction if Cross doesn't arrive within the next 30 minutes.
Marcus felt the pressure of time weighing on their operation.
If the criminals left without being apprehended, They would disappear back into the shadows and potentially resurface later with even more dangerous plans. The royal family's safety depended on resolving this threat decisively.
What about the inside source at the palace? Alexander asked. Do we have any leads on who might be feeding them information?
We've implemented full surveillance on all palace personnel, but it's a complex investigation.
The mole could be anyone with access to your schedules and security arrangements, from senior staff to maintenance workers. The waiting continued as law enforcement teams positioned themselves around the warehouse.
The plan was to allow the criminals to remain in position until they could be surrounded and apprehended simultaneously, preventing any from escaping to threaten the royal family later. Meanwhile, back at Aldermere Palace, a parallel drama was unfolding as Marcus's counterintelligence investigation began yielding results.
The surveillance equipment installed throughout the palace had been monitoring all communications for 24 hours, and patterns were beginning to emerge that pointed toward the identity of the security leak. Senior security analyst David Pemberton was reviewing recorded phone conversations in the palace's secure monitoring room when he discovered something that made his blood run cold. At 11:47 the previous evening, just 3 hours after the emergency family meeting about Isabel's document theft, someone had made an encrypted phone call from within the palace to an unknown number. The call had been brief but devastating. The royal couple knows about the documents. They're working with police and may have information about your warehouse location. Recommend immediate extraction of all personnel. Pemberton immediately contacted Marcus Reed with his findings. Sir, we have identified the security leak. The call was made from extension 40337, which is registered to Thomas Hartwell's office. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thomas Hartwell, Prince Alexander's private secretary and trusted advisor for over 2 decades, was the inside source providing information to the criminal organization. A man who had access to the most intimate details of royal family life, who knew their schedules, their security arrangements, and their personal relationships, had been betraying them to violent criminals. Are you absolutely certain? Marcus demanded, though he knew Pemberton's analysis would be thorough and accurate. Voice print analysis confirms it was Hartwell making the call. We also found evidence of previous communications with the same number dating back several weeks. Sir, this suggests the document theft might have been coordinated with outside criminal elements from the beginning.
The implications were staggering. If Hartwell had been working with the criminal organization, then Isabel's actions might have been influenced or encouraged by someone with their own agenda.
The entire crisis could have been orchestrated to create exactly the kind of chaos and vulnerability that would benefit criminals seeking to exploit the royal family. Marcus immediately contacted Detective Inspector Mitchell to share this crucial intelligence. We have a problem. The inside source has already warned them about our investigation. They know we're coming. At the warehouse, the surveillance teams watched in frustration as the criminal organization began their extraction procedures. They moved with military precision, destroying equipment and documents while maintaining defensive positions near the exits. We need to move now or they'll be gone, Mitchell decided. All units execute apprehension protocol immediately. The coordinated assault on the warehouse began with flashbang grenades and smoke deployment, designed to disorient the criminals while minimizing the risk to law enforcement personnel. Tactical teams entered from multiple angles, using the confusion to surround and isolate the individuals before they could escape or destroy additional evidence.
The operation lasted less than 10 minutes, but it yielded crucial results. 5 of the 6 criminals were apprehended, along with computers, communications equipment, and documents that would provide intelligence about their broader network.
The 6th individual, apparently the leader, escaped in the chaos but left behind materials that would help identify him. We have them, Mitchell reported to Alexander and Elena with obvious satisfaction. More importantly, we have their records and communications that should help us understand the full scope of their operations against your family. However, even as this external threat was being neutralized, the internal crisis at the palace was reaching its climax.
Thomas Hartwell, unaware that his treachery had been discovered, continued his normal duties while secretly coordinating with what remained of the criminal organization. At 7 in the morning, as Alexander and Elena returned to Aldermere Palace under heavy security escort, Marcus Reed was preparing to confront the man who had betrayed 23 years of trust and service.
The evidence against Hartwell was overwhelming, but the motivation for his actions remained unclear. The confrontation took place in the same secure conference room where they had faced Isabel 2 days earlier. Hartwell entered expecting a routine briefing about the security situation, only to find Marcus waiting with damning recordings of his treacherous phone calls. Thomas, Marcus began without preamble. We know about your communications with the criminal organization.
We have recordings, voice analysis, and evidence of your coordination with individuals who threatened the royal family's safety. Hartwell's carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked instantly.
The man who had spent decades managing the most sensitive aspects of royal communications found himself speechless when confronted with evidence of his own betrayal. "How long have you been working against this family?" Marcus continued relentlessly. "Was Queen Consort Isabel acting on your advice when she stole those documents?" The second question broke Hartwell's remaining resistance. He collapsed into his chair, his face aging years in the span of seconds as the weight of his actions finally overwhelmed him. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he whispered. "I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I just needed money for my daughter's medical treatments. The National Health Service wouldn't cover the experimental procedures she needed."
Marcus felt a mixture of anger and sympathy as he listened to Hartwell's confession. The private secretary's daughter had been battling a rare form of cancer for 2 years, and the family had exhausted their savings pursuing treatments that offered hope but weren't covered by traditional medical insurance.
You sold information about the royal family to pay for your daughter's health care. At first it was just schedule information, nothing that would compromise their safety. The criminal organization paid enormous sums for advanced knowledge of public appearances and travel plans.
I told myself it was victimless, that knowing when the prince would visit a charity event couldn't hurt anyone. But it escalated beyond that, Marcus observed grimly. Hartwell nodded miserably. They started demanding more sensitive information. Details about security arrangements, private conversations, family relationships. When I tried to refuse, they threatened to expose my previous cooperation and destroy my daughter's chance for treatment. The confession continued for over an hour, as Hartwell detailed his involvement in what had become a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting the royal family. The criminal organization had used his information not just for financial manipulation but also for planning more serious crimes that could have endangered lives. Most shocking was his admission that he had encouraged Queen Consort Isabel's insecurities about Elena's success, subtly suggesting that she needed to take action to protect her position within the family. He had even provided her with information about Elena's office security, making the document theft possible. "You manipulated Isabel into stealing those documents," Marcus accused. "You used her emotional vulnerabilities to create exactly the kind of crisis that would benefit your criminal associates. I thought if there was a scandal involving Elena's charitable work, it would distract from other security issues and give me cover to provide more information without suspicion. I never imagined it would lead to threats of violence or put anyone in direct danger." As the full scope of Hartwell's betrayal became clear, Alexander and Elena listened to recorded excerpts of his confession in their private study. The revelation that someone they had trusted implicitly had orchestrated the entire crisis was more painful than Isabel's jealous actions or even the criminal threats they had faced.
23 years, Alexander said quietly. He was at my wedding, helped plan our honeymoon, knew our most private thoughts and feelings.
"How do we ever trust anyone again?" Elena took his hand, feeling the same sense of violation and bewilderment.
The man who had managed their schedules, screened their correspondence, and advised them on sensitive matters had been systematically betraying them for months. Every conversation, every private moment, every expression of vulnerability had potentially been sold to their enemies.
"We trust carefully and verify constantly," she replied. "This experience will make us stronger and more cautious, but we can't let it make us isolated or paranoid." The legal consequences for both Hartwell and Isabel would be severe. Hartwell faced charges of espionage, conspiracy, and facilitating criminal activity that carried potential sentences of decades in prison. Isabel, while not directly involved with the criminal organization, had committed theft and breach of security that could result in criminal prosecution and permanent exile from the royal family. However, Alexander and Elena faced difficult decisions about how to handle these prosecutions. Public trials would expose the very information they had fought to protect, potentially causing more damage to the monarchy than the original crimes.
Private justice might be more effective but could set dangerous precedents for accountability within the royal household. "What about the daughter?" Elena asked after reviewing the evidence against Hartwell.
"Is there any way to ensure she receives the medical treatment she needs while still holding him accountable for his actions?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "The government has programs for exceptional medical circumstances. We might be able to arrange for her treatment through official channels while still pursuing legal consequences for her father's crimes." The compassionate approach reflected Elena's character and demonstrated the kind of leadership that had made her so popular with the British public. Even when betrayed by people they trusted, she sought solutions that balanced justice with mercy, accountability with humanity. Over the following weeks, the crisis that had threatened to destroy the royal family gradually resolved into a new normal that was both more secure and more cautious than before. Enhanced security protocols were implemented throughout the palace, with multiple layers of verification for sensitive information and regular counterintelligence reviews to prevent future infiltrations.
Queen Consort Isabel accepted a plea agreement that involved community service, financial restitution, and a voluntary reduction in her official royal duties.
She would remain a member of the family but with limited access to sensitive information and reduced public appearances. The arrangement allowed her to maintain her dignity while acknowledging the seriousness of her actions.
Thomas Hartwell was sentenced to 12 years in prison after cooperating fully with authorities to expose the criminal network that had exploited his desperation. His daughter received the medical treatment she needed through a special government program, and the family was relocated under protective custody to prevent retaliation from the criminal organization.
The broader criminal network was gradually dismantled through intelligence gathered during the warehouse operation and Hartwell's cooperation. Several foreign operatives were expelled from the country, and new protocols were established to protect all government officials from similar infiltration attempts.
For Alexander and Elena, the crisis ultimately strengthened their marriage and their commitment to public service. The betrayals they had endured together created a deeper bond of trust and mutual support, while the experience of being targeted by criminal elements reinforced their understanding of the responsibilities that came with their positions.
We learned something important about ourselves during this crisis, Elena reflected during one of their private evening conversations. We discovered that our commitment to this institution and to each other is stronger than any threat or betrayal we might face.
Alexander nodded, thinking about the long history of the monarchy and the many challenges it had survived over the centuries.
Every generation faces tests that determine whether the institution continues or falls. I think we passed our test, but the price was higher than I ever imagined it would be. The final resolution came 6 months later when Simon Cross's complete business records were recovered from a safety deposit box mentioned in his suicide note. The documents revealed the full extent of his criminal activities and provided evidence that led to the prosecution of dozens of individuals involved in similar information trafficking operations.
Most importantly for the royal family, the records confirmed that all copies of Elena's stolen documents had been destroyed before Cross's death. The security report that had been missing was found among the burned papers in his office, apparently never distributed to his criminal associates. The crisis had ended, but its lessons would influence royal security protocols and family dynamics for years to come. The ancient institution of monarchy had proven its resilience once again, adapting to modern threats while maintaining the traditions and values that had sustained it through centuries of change and challenge.
As Alexander and Elena stood together on the palace balcony one evening, watching the sun set over their kingdom, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The betrayals and threats they had faced had been painful, but they had emerged stronger and more united than before.
The palace walls have protected many secrets over the centuries, Elena observed. Now they're protecting the secret of how much we've learned about trust, loyalty, and the true meaning of service to others. And about how love can survive even the deepest betrayals when it's built on genuine commitment and shared values. Alexander added,
Whatever challenges we face in the future, we'll face them together. The storm had passed, but the kingdom remained, guided by leaders who had been tested by fire and proven worthy of the trust placed in them by history and by their people. The ancient walls of Aldermere Palace stood as strong as ever, protecting not just a family but an institution that had adapted once again to serve a changing world while honoring the best of its traditions.
In the end, the greatest victory was not in defeating their enemies or protecting their secrets, but in discovering that their commitment to each other and to their duty could survive any challenge that fate might bring their way. The monarchy would continue, strengthened by adversity and guided by leaders who understood both the price of power and the responsibility that came with it.